Good morning. I'm Jim Wood, Chairman of Wood Communications Group, a strategic communications firm based in Madison, Wisconsin, specializing in strategic planning, market research, and crisis management. I also serve as strategic counsel to Competitive Wisconsin and to the BBIII Council. It's a pleasure to be here and have an opportunity to chat with you. What I'd like to do as we begin the session this morning is give you a little bit of background on Competitive Wisconsin. Competitive Wisconsin was founded in 1981 at a time that was then one of the worst recessions in the 20th century. Unemployment in places like Kenosha, Racine, Beloit was running in the 12 to 13% range. A lot of people out of work. Interest rates for folks trying to buy a house, borrow money, was in the 14 to 17% range. It was a very, very difficult time. And representatives from the business community, the labor community, the agricultural community, the academic community came together and said, we need to think about ways we could collaborate strategically to make Wisconsin competitive, to help begin to address these sorts of issues. Collaborative posture has remained its bedrock kind of organizational format ever since. As you can see, we're not a large organization, but we have some very, very good players. And so we have business members, we have association members, we have institutional members that we think give us insight and reach. And in recent years, we have added the BBIII Council, which, as you can see again, is made up of predominantly corporate and large organizational and institutional members. For each individual BBIII initiative, there are BBIII, in this case, 3 additional members, and you can see who those folks are. The second point I'd like to make as we start the presentation is that BBIII is a process. It's not simply a product. As with the first 20 plus years of CWI's operations, the first 2 steps remain the same. It's a matter of identifying an issue important to Wisconsin's competitive posture, and then hiring researchers to be done by recognized professionals. But over the last 5 years, the organization concluded that if in fact we wanted to make a difference, we were going to have to concentrate more heavily on public outreach and public input. And so as you can see here, once we had that research initially done by the professionals, we then reach out and do preliminary briefings. We then do an initial BBIII report, and we convene then a BBIII strategic planning group, and I'll give you some examples of this in just a minute. That strategic planning group takes all of the work done thus far and makes its contributions, and we then convene a series of Wisconsin economic summits, again in order to get input and to reach out to folks. We then issue the final report, and we then move on from there. Let me give you some examples of how that has worked with BBIII I and BBIII II. BBIII I was focused on understanding Wisconsin's competitive challenges and opportunities. We retained the services of Deloitte Consulting to help do the research. BBIII I, we did not do preliminary briefings. We issued the initial BBIII report and convened the strategic planning group, which at that time for BBIII I included 42 organizations, companies, and institutions all contributing and reviewing the process. With their work in hand, we convened the Wisconsin Economic Summits, 3 of them in Appleton, La Crosse, and Milwaukee, and then issued a final report, BBIII I, titled The Blueprint for Prosperity and Economic Development Strategy. And then, because CWI is persuaded that we really need to produce something out of all of this, we turned to policy recommendations. Those policy recommendations led, we believe, to the creation of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, shone an important light on the need for venture capital, and encouraged serious discussions about a focus on cluster economic development. BBIII II focused on what we had identified as the single most important issue in BBIII I, and that's workforce development challenges and opportunities. We partnered in this case with the Manpower Group out of Milwaukee, global research company with great reputation. We produced then some preliminary findings and held 12 briefings around the state, similar to the ones that you're at today. We then produced a preliminary report on growing Wisconsin's workforce and talent pool, convened the Be Bold Strategic Planning Group, which this time had 86 organizations, companies, and institutions, held summits in Waukesha, Eau Claire, and Madison. And as we take a look at the policy side of things, we think we made a contribution to what is now known in the Department of Workforce Development as the Fast Forward Plan. And we made, we think, serious contributions to the interest in a stronger focus on career planning in the K-12 schools and in the advanced education field. Which brings us to Be Bold 3. As you know, we are focused this time around on turbocharging what's working in Wisconsin, which I will be explaining a little bit later. We have finished the first phase and second phase of our research, which we'll be talking about today, and are now in the process of going around the state with these briefs. Our working title for Be Bold 3 is Accelerate Wisconsin, and we're focused on how to turbocharge the state. I want to make a point that while we're focused on turbocharging what's already working in Wisconsin, part of our charge in doing this is understanding how to turbocharge all of the clusters in the state of Wisconsin. To that end, as we undertake our research both here in Wisconsin and across the country, we are very concentrated on the question of how to develop templates that can be used by all the clusters. And as we do so, we are very much in mind of the objectives set out by the Be Bold Council in Competitive Wisconsin, which are that we are seeking higher per capita income, a strong sustainable talent pool, enhanced ability to get products to market, and maximized responsible use of resources. As we began, the first question, as you might expect, was what do we mean by what's working? CWI and Be Bold have always had two access points with regard to that question. One is the growth of jobs and the other is the growth of wealth. We put a primary emphasis on, in Be Bold 3, on job growth and approached the University of Wisconsin system and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They were kind enough to give us the services of some very, very able people, partially chaired by Dr. John Whitty, who, as you can see, is an emeritus professor and a former director of the La Follette School of Public Policy. I will let Dr. Whitty speak for himself and his colleagues.
I'm John Whitty, a professor emeritus of the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Political Science Department and the Robert La Follette School of Public Affairs. I'm going to discuss our paper, Strategic Employment Growth in Wisconsin, which was written by myself, Bob Haveman, Rob Stuper, and Scott Wood. What I want to do today is talk first of all about the charge that we were given to write this paper by Competitive Wisconsin and Be Bold Initiative. And then I want to talk about the methods we used and our results and then some final conclusions. We were charged by Competitive Wisconsin as part of their Be Bold Initiative with identifying industrial sectors in Wisconsin that looked very promising for future development and growth. We were given three sorts of issues to look at. First, past employment growth. Secondly, contributions to wealth in the future, and then future employment growth. Those are the three variables or factors that we were looking at in terms of trying to identify sectors for the state of Wisconsin to concentrate on. Now, the methods we used was we used statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we looked first of all at past employment growth by sector. That was from 1997 to 2010. And then we used future employment growth from 2010 to 2020. Those were estimates that were made, again, by the Bureau of Labor Statistics with some work also from Wisconsin agencies. Now, in order to study wealth, the wealth contributions, we added two other variables to the study. One was the average wages per sector, and the second one was the location quotient. And that's a measure of competitiveness in the sector based on the synergies of other industries related to that sector. So we had four variables that we worked with, and we did 6 different models with those variables. The two most important models were using just past labor growth and future estimated labor growth by sector, just those two variables. The second one used all 4 variables, past growth, future growth, the location coefficient, and the wages, the average wages in the sector. The results are that, first of all, the results over all 6 models are very consistent. And the theme is that these are all the sectors we identified, and we identified 10 because they clustered together, were service sectors. Now, they were wide-ranging service sectors that have a lot of influence on other sectors as well, but they are all in the service area. Specifically, which sectors did we identify? They tended to cluster into three different forms. The first one was management and professional services. That included administrative and support systems, professional, scientific, and technical services, such as EPIC, management of companies and enterprises, which is very useful because it's an entrepreneurial sector, and insurance carriers and related activities. The second cluster was healthcare and social services, primarily healthcare. That included ambulatory healthcare, hospitals, nursing and residential care facilities, very important with the aging population, and then social services. And the final cluster was leisure and recreation services. One was a very small sector, amusement, gambling, and recreation industries, casinos. The second was a very large sector, food services and drinking places, restaurants and bars. They had the largest growth of any employment sector in the state of Wisconsin, and also the largest projected growth. Now, let me just make some notes on all of these different sectors. First of all, they cover a range. The restaurant sector, for example, and the bar sector, those are very low-paid jobs, many of them. On the other hand, they're entry-level jobs, and jobs that youth can get. So our young people in Wisconsin can get a leg up on the employment market. For example, they're advertising now for 15-year-olds on the McDonald's stand here in the McDonald's restaurant here in Madison, Wisconsin. There's also another set of sectors, however, that are very high paid and have been here for a long time, such as insurance companies. The insurance sectors are very highly paid, $75,000 and larger. And the managerial and the professional technical services are also very highly paid and middle-level numbers of jobs. There's another aspect to these sectors that's important. While some of them are new, some of them are very much related to traditional sectors in Wisconsin. For example, insurance. The insurance sector has been vibrant in Wisconsin for over 100 years. The insurance companies moved to Wisconsin many, many years ago, in the beginning of the 20th century, because we had regulations governing insurance companies, and insurance companies were seeking legitimacy, and the regulations gave them the legitimacy, so we have a lot of insurance companies in the state of Wisconsin. We also have a very strong and vibrant health industry. We have for at least 50 years, and it's growing rapidly, and that's also heavily referenced in these conclusions. Now, finally, for some conclusions to talk about, obviously there's going to be some controversy about these results. We're emphasizing service. Those are not they are not the only traditions in Wisconsin. For example, manufacturing, dairy farming, food processing are all very important sectors in Wisconsin, and they are not in this directly. Now, they are indirectly, because when you have health insurance and health companies, for example, the employees of those companies obviously are going to benefit. When we have professional and technical services such as computer work and software, that's going to affect manufacturing, because manufacturing is becoming computerized more and more. So there's an indirect synergy here with those companies, but they're not direct. However, having said that, we would also acknowledge that there are different studies that can be done using different variables. We were using the variables primarily around employment and average wages. If you use such things as increasing productivity of sectors, you'd get different results than we would get. However, having said that, I do want to end by saying one thing. We are very confident of these results. These sectors came up over and over again, no matter how we modeled the data. So we're very certain, and we think that the service sectors are a very important aspect of future economic growth in the state of Wisconsin. Thank you.
When the BBIII Council and the CWI board had an opportunity to look at Dr. Woody and the UW-Madison's research, there was no question in our mind that they had reached the right conclusions in terms of the job that we had given them. Again, the question being to find what was working in terms of job creation and job growth. On the other hand, we were concerned as we looked at our priority outcomes, more good jobs, that is higher per capita income, strong, effective, sustainable talent pool, we became persuaded that we needed to do some additional research. And so at that point in time, we turned to the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation and asked for their help WEDC was kind enough to contribute the services of two accomplished researchers who, again, we will let speak for themselves.
Hello, I'm Benjamin Losevich,
And I'm Kyle Johnson.
and we are researchers with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, otherwise known as WEDC. WEDC can trace its origins to the original BBIII study, which was a comprehensive economic development strategy for the entire state of Wisconsin. This study revamped the Department of Commerce and directly gave birth to the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. WEDC has since been involved in Competitive Wisconsin's additional BBIII studies, which includes this BBIII study of Phase 1 and Phase 2 research. The Phase 1 and Phase 2 research effort was part of a productive interactive team across Competitive Wisconsin's non-political consortium. The Phase 1 and Phase 2 research focused on analyzing and understanding new and existing data to identify high-performing sectors and clusters with a focus on strong and sustainable talent pool and good family-sustaining income positions. WEDC was asked to contribute to the initial industry research that had been gathered and further enhance it to be included as the framework for the BBIII mission to turbocharge the economic activity that was already working in Wisconsin.
We recommended a more robust set of analyses at the 6-digit NAICS code level. These analyses include industry shift share analysis. This analysis shows the competitive advantage of a region when compared to the national and industrial employment trends. Economic base theory, which explains industries that bring revenue into the state. The state's gross domestic product and total industry exports. This tells us which industries are being traded in world markets. Total employment and employment growth, to identify Wisconsin's employment strengths. Location quotient and total establishments, revealing the demographic concentration of industries compared to the nation and the quantity of businesses in each industry. Industry wages, salary, and supplements. This showed industries that would support family-sustaining positions. Industry multipliers for sales, jobs, and earnings. These multipliers explain the ripple effects in employment, sales, and earnings throughout the state economy. And utilizing earlier economic studies in driver industries in Wisconsin, like the Wisconsin Economic Future Study, as a benchmark guide. The process used for these analyses started with gathering 6-digit level NAICS code data for the state of Wisconsin, ranking each industry through the previously mentioned analyses, and then creating an overall score to determine driver and emerging industries in the state. Then finally, we made recommendations on industries to focus on for Competitive Wisconsin.
Competitive Wisconsin then reviewed these findings and requested additional analyses of industries that would serve as a template for future study. 3 broad industries were selected as the initial template for further analysis: food processing, business services, and healthcare bioinformatics. Specifically, WEDC was given the task of conducting these analyses. The data included the top 5 6-digit U.S. NAICS codes with previously mentioned data, an industry summary of the jobs, change in jobs, earnings compared to the nation, as well as the top 5 other states that included these clusters. The workforce demographics of who is currently working in these top 5 6-digit U.S. NAICS codes. Staffing patterns, specifically the top 5 occupations within these industries. And finally, WEDC provided the top 20 facilities by employment in these 6-digit U.S. industry NAICS codes throughout the state of Wisconsin. This research has now been handed over to Competitive Wisconsin for additional work that will be accomplished by Deloitte. Deloitte will be examining other states that have less similar or more strength in these industries and glean what legislative practices could be adaptive for use in Wisconsin to enhance the economic activity that is already working.
All of the information I've just been talking about can be found at the website identified on this particular slide. You'll find BBIII and BBIII reports. You'll find information about the BBIII Council, the BBIII process, but you'll also find all of the research data, including the spreadsheets. So let me try and put this in some perspective at this point in time. We started with the work done by the University of Wisconsin-Madison team. We then went to WEDC and asked for their help. They ran a series of additional economic filters and did additional research. We combined that with information from Deloitte and from BBIII. And where we are now is that we have identified 3 clusters we want to look at. You will notice that in the process of doing the additional research, we have moved from bars and restaurants, the leisure service, to food processing and manufacturing, to business services, and to healthcare. And let me make a point here. We've always had 2 operational objectives. We've always understood that we needed to focus on the shorter term in terms of understanding what we could do that would enhance our workforce and talent development efforts. But we have also always understood in this process that we had to take a look at where the jobs of the future were. And to that end, as we began this second or third part of the research, we asked the question of where change was coming in these 3 sectors and speculated that, for example, in the food processing area, that change, pressure, innovation would take place at least around questions related to water management, to public health, to processing technology and packaging. We looked at the healthcare field and said clearly the issue of quality control is going to continue to be important. Public health issues are going to be important. We expect to see major change, however, around the question of management and delivery of healthcare. And in the area of business services, obviously software publishing, information technology are going to be producing activity. So with those 3 issues and clusters in mind, we concluded that we needed to approach the research by looking at 3 analytical pathways. The first of these would be the business competitive factors, which you might describe as the usual suspects: taxes, regulation, workforce, etc. The second, however, emerged out of our concern about the changing demographics in the state of Wisconsin, most of which many of you are familiar with. Specifically, that we have an aging state, and to the extent that we are going to be able to have a thriving economy, we are not only going to have to keep more of our young people in the state, persuade them to stay, we are going to have to recruit people from all across the country and around the globe to come to Wisconsin and see it as a good place to work. And that means that we need to understand cost and quality of living as competitive factors as part of our strategic efforts to do economic development in this state. And then third, because everything is changing so quickly, the need to be nimble, the need to understand and to collaborate raises the value of the strategic collaboration factors as we look around at what others are doing. So those are the 3 analytical pathways we decided we needed to pursue. We also decided at this point in time that we would proceed sequentially, starting with the food processing and manufacturing cluster, then proceeding to the healthcare cluster, and then proceeding to the business services cluster. We began our work on the food processing and food manufacturing cluster by gathering leaders from that industry, including representatives from the Midwest Food Processors, Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association, Hormel, Birdseye, and other leaders in the industry. And we began with that first platform, which was the question of business competitive factors: access to required skills, taxes, product to market costs, regulation, energy costs, healthcare costs, quality of life, etc. And we asked the representatives from the food manufacturing clusters in Wisconsin to talk to us initially at a 3-hour session managed by folks from Deloitte. And we started with the question of what's working and what's not working. We heard some things we expected to hear and some things we hadn't expected to hear. For example, one of the early comments we got was from an individual who told us that one of the things that was not working here in Wisconsin was that the infrastructure was out of alignment. And I didn't know what that meant, so I asked. And he said, well, let me give you an example. Person said 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, the average dairy farm in the state of Wisconsin was producing about 300 pounds of milk a day, and we would send out a truck to stop, make 1, 2, 3 stops to pick up milk from those dairy farms. Today, dairy farms are producing considerably more than 300 pounds a day, and some are producing quite a bit more than that. And we are sending out not small trucks, but semis in order to move product around. Those trucks are heavier and wider than the roads on what they're traveling on. And eventually, he believes we're going to have to do something about that. He also said that under Wisconsin law, if you want to move farming equipment on a local road or highway, you have to get permission from the local unit of government that helps service that road. And this individual suggested that they have suppliers who need to get anywhere from 7 to 8, maybe 9 permits from different local units of government in order to be able to move their equipment and their product around. I think the general take on it was that that makes it very difficult in terms of trying to get things done in a timely fashion. So that was an issue. We had known that there would be comment about water management issues, and we got those partially as they related to regulation. But another individual made a very cogent comment, I thought, and that was that the food processors and manufacturers are here because the farmers are here and the produce is being grown here. And he said the farmers are here and are able to grow the produce rather, because Wisconsin has such fantastic water resources in terms of water, groundwater and surface water. But he said the operative phrase here is access to water. And so when you look at issues that are being raised now in the Central Sands area related to water table levels, and you take a look at issues being raised elsewhere around the state, particularly in the Fox River Valley area, about farm runoff and phosphorus issues, he said we need to be paying close attention to that question of access, not a matter of giving up on environmental regulation, but beginning to address the question of how do we make sure the environment is being protected, but that access to the water is also being protected. Found that interesting. All of the folks are concerned about a shortage of workers. They talked about their concerns about regulation, primarily in terms of inconsistent regulation. As you know, all of the food processors and manufacturers have to deal with both federal and state regulators. But what they said was most troubling, or at least some of them thought was most troubling, was inconsistency within agencies that it depended upon who you talked to, what kind of an answer you got, and that makes it difficult in terms of actually planning, in terms of the inconsistency. And so timely decision making, shortage of workers, inconsistent regulation, water management issues in this infrastructure were the kinds of issues that came out. They talked about a lot of other things during that conversation as well, and those will surface in the final report and have helped guide the research. The last thing we asked folks to do at this meeting on June 2nd was to identify other states, and as you can see, they identified for us Texas, New York, and Colorado. I'll be talking a little bit later about what we're looking for in those states, but for the time being, those are the states that they select. In talking with the food processors and manufacturers, as well as hundreds of people at these preliminary briefing sessions, a number of issues came up with regard to the cost or quality of living competitive factors. Let me just briefly touch on the access to affordable, sustainable education. The issue, we believe there, is that it's not enough to simply see that somebody gets the skills so that they can get a job. It is understanding that there's a dynamic that we need to be exploring to help them keep the jobs once they've got them. The shelf life of technical training degrees and specialized skills is shorter and shorter in this modern world, and we believe that we need to be looking at the intersection where people who come to Wisconsin or decide to stay in Wisconsin do so partially because they know that they've got a stable, sustainable educational process that will enable them not only to get a job, but to keep that job. Central also to this whole discussion about the cost and quality of living competitive factors is clearly the rise of the millennials. We talk about the role that the baby boomers played in American history. There were 85 million, give or take, live births in the boomer generation. They are now projecting 100 million plus in the millennial population. Now, obviously, that's not as large a percentage of the population at the time that the boomers came online in this country, but it is nonetheless a huge population that will affect our economy here in Wisconsin, across the nation. All of the research says these good folks will in fact leave their parents' and grandparents' basements. They will get jobs, they will get married, they will buy houses, and they will be critical to our capacity to rebuild the middle class in Wisconsin. And lastly, I'd like to talk about the strategic comparative analysis, which takes a look at the collaborative synergy between public and private sectors, the entrepreneurial culture, and the economic development culture. We're all familiar with the idea that there are standalone clusters like food processing, manufacturing, health and wellness, recreation, etc., and that there are service clusters that serve those clusters like accounting, banking, data management, and human resources. In recent years, there has been a growth in the type of service clusters that exist. And so sales and marketing has become a bigger factor. Mechatronics has become a bigger factor, as has information technology and finance. Now, however, what we're discovering is that there are public sector service clusters that are increasingly having a direct and demonstrable impact on the private sector's economic productivity. And we believe we need to take a look at those as well. We've talked about the importance of workforce and talent development brought on by increasing dependence on rapidly evolving technological capability and scientific knowledge, requiring the ability not just to deliver the talented workers employers need at a given point in time, but also to help those workers and employers access the information and training they need to keep pace with change while they do their job. Similarly, changing workforce demographics and preferences driven by retirements on the one hand and the emergence of the millennials as a growing numerical reality on the other requires paying close and thoughtful attention to our infrastructure, physical, educational, and experiential. And the reality of constant, rapid, significant change demands strategic and tactical agility and nimbleness that simply cannot be achieved without a sort of always-on network of informed, timely, and dynamic interactions within and amongst corporate leaders, experts, educators, policymakers, and policy administrators. For all of these reasons, we think it now behooves us to begin to look at the question not just of private services, but public services as major players in economic development. Specifically, we think we should be looking at talent and workforce development services as they relate to both short-term needs and pipeline and sustainability needs. We should be looking at infrastructure services as they relate not just to bricks and mortar, but also the quality of life and community development that will be so essential to attracting and retaining the millennials. And at the strategic synergies and collaboration that will be so essential to allowing for a nimble, responsive economy in the state of Wisconsin that will enable us to address our challenges and opportunities effectively in real time. We believe this additional perspective will help enrich our analysis of how to turbocharge what's working here in the state of Wisconsin in all three of the cluster sectors that we are looking at. So in conclusion, let me again point out that we are focused on food processing and manufacturing at the moment. We will be doing healthcare and hopefully doing business services as well. We have two operational objectives, one to focus on enhancing workforce and talent development in the short term and the long term, obviously, but also to focus on growing the jobs and businesses of the future. To that end, we will, as we indicated, be looking at the three analytical platforms business competitive factors, cost quality of living competitive factors, and strategic collaborative factors. We will also be looking at workforce talent development and infrastructure capacity in terms of how those public services affect what's working here in Wisconsin. And throughout that process, we will, of course, keep in mind our objectives: higher per capita income, strong sustainable talent pool, enhanced ability to get products to market, and maximum responsible use of resources. Finally, thank you very much for your time and attention. We appreciate your thoughts, your input, and look forward to talking to you in the near future.